Before the rooster crows, you wake up not to an alarm, but to the soft shifting of bodies in the dark. Your youngest has stolen the blanket again, and someone is snoring near your feet. The fire's gone out. Of course it has. You tug your shawl closer, the wool stiff with smoke from yesterday's hearth. Outside, the world is still as ink, and even the rooster hasn't yet dared to sing. But your day has already begun. You sit up slowly on the straw-stuffed mattress, careful not to disturb the others. The baby lets out a gurgled sigh and turns over. You envy that sleep, the dreamless, endless kind only children seem to have. You move through the single room, your bare feet finding every cold patch on the dirt floor, every loose pebble. The chamber pot sloshes nearby. You make a mental note to empty it before the sun's up, lest the stink become unbearable. In the hearth, last night's fire is now a heap of dull grey ash. You kneel, poking around with a bent iron rod, until there a faint ember, stubborn and red. You blow on it, slow and steady until the glow brightens. The thin kindling smokes as it catches, then flickers into life. You feed it like a child, a pinch of dry moss, a splinter of wood, a breath held between hope and disappointment. Soon the fire crackles, bathing the cottage in its soft orange glow. It casts dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls and warms your fingers just enough to feel your knuckles again. You reach for the bread, yesterday's end, too hard for biting, and soak it in water to soften it. You chew silently. It tastes like ash and effort. Before long, it's time to prepare the others. You rouse your eldest, a girl of 10 with her father's eyes and your habit of sighing at the cold. She wraps her arms around herself and trudges outside to draw water. The well is 50 steps from the door and always feels like a mile when it's still dark. She doesn't complain, not out loud anyway. While she's gone, you begin to sort the linens, a pile to mend, a pile to boil, a pile that might just be too far gone. Every piece is a memory. This one tore when your son climbed the orchard fence. That one stained during your last birth. You set them aside methodically, like a scribe with scrolls. You hear the sound of a wooden bucket setting down outside and your daughter's return. She's soaked to the knees from the dew on the grass. You tousle her hair, more gesture than grooming, and begin the morning's first real task. Breakfast for the household. There's no meat, not until the next feast day, but there's enough barley to make a thin gruel. You stir it in the iron pot, watching it bubble, thick and stubborn. The others begin to wake, drawn by the smell or simply by routine. Your husband grunts as he stretches, joints clicking like a carpenter's bench. He nods at you, not quite good morning, not quite thank you, and pulls on his breeches. He's off to tend the pigs and check the traps. The children gather around the table, still quiet, still half asleep, bowls in hand. Over breakfast, no one speaks much. Someone sneezes, someone spills, life continues. Outside, the first hint of sunlight spills over the thatch roofs of the village, catching on the frost that's crept in overnight. You step out briefly to toss water on the dung pile, careful not to slip in the muck. Smoke is beginning to curl from chimneys up and down the lane. Other women are up too, their silhouettes visible through open shutters. One waves to you, a motion slow and tired, like yours. This is not the world of princesses or painted tapestries. No, this is your life, all cold, cracked and real. Yet there's strength in it too, a quiet pride. Your breath makes a cloud in the air as you exhale, watching it disappear into the morning. And somewhere in the trees beyond the fields, a rooster finally crows. Late, as usual. Section 2, Fire and Flower. The fire is now steady, giving off just enough warmth to dry the hem of your shift, which you accidentally dipped in the water bucket earlier. You crouch low by the hearth again, this time with the small hand quern placed between your knees. The grindstone is cracked on one edge, but it still works. Mostly. The children have run outside, chasing chickens and scattering dry leaves. You won't see them again until they're hungry or scraped. Your job now is to make flour, and your arms already ache in anticipation. You feed a handful of barley grains into the top hole of the quern. The motion is circular, mindless, almost meditative. Left, right, left, right. The sound of stone on stone is soft but persistent, like distant thunder on a quiet night. You feel each rotation deep in your shoulders. Every family grinds their own unless they can afford the miller, and you cannot. Besides, the miller always takes a suspiciously large fee from your sack. You'd rather wear out your joints than your trust. The powder that falls from the bottom is rough, more grit than flour. But it will do, it always does. As you work, you hum. A simple melody passed down from your mother, who likely learned it from hers. It's not a hymn, not quite a lullaby either, just a tune to keep the silence company. You pause to rub your wrists. The ache is dull but constant, like a tooth that never quite rots, but never heals either. Your youngest pokes her head inside the cottage, her cheeks red from cold and mischief. She points to the flour dust on your nose and giggles. You pretend to sneeze in reply, which earns you another burst of laughter. That sound, light, unguarded, is the best kind of reward, better than a feast day, almost. By mid-morning you've filled a small cloth sack with what passes for flour. You'll mix it with water and salt later to bake on the griddle stone. Flatbread, again. There hasn't been yeast in weeks, and the last time someone tried to make risen loaves, it was a disaster involving sour mash and a blistered iron pan. You'd rather not talk about it. You step outside to catch your breath and stretch your spine. Across the field, you see Mistress Aelith shaking out her wash. Her arms are bare despite the chill, and she looks up just long enough to offer a tired nod. Everyone is tired. That's the default state of thing. Tired, but moving. As you lift your apron to carry the flour indoors, a gust of wind picks up dust from the lane. It stings your eyes and bites at your skin, sharp as thistles. You turn your face away, cursing the wind and its timing. You need to keep the flour dry. Always something. Back inside, you add a splash of water to a bowl and begin kneading. Your hands disappear into the sticky mess, working instinctively. It clings to your fingers like second skin. You scrape the sides, pat it into shape, and set it by the fire, wrapped in cloth. It won't rise, but it will rest. You envy it that. While waiting, you check the firewood pile. Low again. It's always low. You send the eldest to fetch more from the common store. She groans but obeys. You remind her, as you always do, not to take too much. The bailiff watches the stack, like a hawk watches field mice. You hear your neighbor calling for her dog, cursing in a whisper. The animal has likely wandered into someone's chicken coop again. You smile to yourself, thinking of the last time it happened. Feathers everywhere, and a chicken with a limp who now walks in circles. The morning wears on. Your husband has returned, boots muddy and smelling of wet straw. He says nothing, but you see the new rip in his sleeve. Another mend. You add it to the mental list, already crowded. Then comes the sound you dread. The church bell tolling 3 short notes. Not a feast, not a fire, a funeral. Someone's gone. You pause, hand on the bowl, and listen. You don't need to ask who, a word will spread before noon. In this life, death is as familiar as flour and fire. Another name whispered over a wooden box, another woman left, to knead bread alone. You murmur a brief prayer, half out of habit, half out of fear. You've already lost too many. Still, the dough must be shaped. Still, the fire must be fed. And so you carry on, not because it is noble, but because there is no other way. Section 3, linen and lice. You carry the linens to the stream behind the cottage, arms loaded like a beast of burden, neck craned sideways to keep the pile balanced. The sun is higher now, warming just enough to melt the frost off the grass, though your breath still fogs the air in puffs. Your back protests with each step, but the stink of old sweat and damp cloth motivates you more than any prayer could. At the bank, you drop the heap onto a flat stone with a wet thud. The water is a dark mirror, still and cold, and it bites when you plunge your hands in. Your fingertips go numb almost instantly, but there's no use complaining. The stream doesn't care. You begin the task the way you always do: sort, soak, scrub. You swirl a shirt in the shallows, slapping it against the rock like some angry fishwife. Bits of dried skin and lice float away like tiny ghosts. The soap you use is coarse and caustic. Boiled animal fat mixed with ash. Doesn't smell pleasant, but neither does mildew. Some days you find yourself wondering whether the nobility scrub their underthings like this. Do their hands go raw and pink? Do they pick lice from the seams of their nightshirts? You imagine a duchess fainting at the sight of a boil or shrieking over a tick. It makes you grin. You reach for the next item, a child's tunic with a rip down the side and suspicious brown stains. You don't ask questions. Instead, you dunk it, wring it, slap it again. The motion is rhythmic, almost meditative, like spinning or prayer. It gives your thoughts room to wander. Across the water, you spot another woman doing the same, Lady Merrin from 2 cottages down. You nod at each other, the silent communion of washerwomen. She holds up a sheet and rolls her eyes dramatically, then mimics scratching her head with exaggerated disgust. You laugh, not out loud, just in your eyes, which is all that's needed. Lice are a fact of life. Everyone has them. You've heard that monks shave their heads not for holiness, but because it's easier to spot the little beast. There's a woman in the next village who claims to have a cure, boiled onion water and wormwood, but it just made your scalp smell like stew. As the morning wears on, you lay the clean linens on low bushes to dry. They hang like ghostly flags fluttering in the breeze. One slips loose and floats into the stream. You curse, chase it, and finally retrieve it, dripping and muddy. Start over. Of course, you sit back on your heels, panting, arms sore, palms wrinkled from water. The wind has picked up, and your nose runs freely. You wipe it with the back of your hand. It smells of lie and effort. A child screams in the distance, not yours, but familiar. Likely a scraped knee or an argument over a stick. You hear the rising wail of a mother's scolding. Then silence. All is well, or well enough. You take a moment to stretch your back and look up. The sky is soft blue, empty, except for a bird circling high. A hawk, maybe. You wonder what it sees when it looks down. The same village every day, the same women crouched by water, the same steam rising from rooftops. You wonder if it's bored. Your stomach grumbles, but there's still work to do. You gather the damp linens in your apron, careful not to drop anything this time. They're heavier when wet, and the weight digs into your forearms. By the time you return home, your arms are trembling and your hair is sticking to your forehead. Inside, you drape the linens near the hearth to finish drying. The steam rises slowly, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and damp cloth. Then, from behind a cupboard, you find it. A single louse, crawling boldly along a drying sleeve. You flick it into the fire with a grim satisfaction, a small victory. 1 down, 100 to go, but you'll take it. Section 4, a visit to the manor. By midday, your hands are red and wrinkled, your shoulders sore, and your patience thinning like the soles of your shoes. But duty doesn't pause for comfort, and the manor expects its deliveries. You gather a small bundle, 6 eggs, a cloth-wrapped wedge of soft cheese, and a jug of fresh milk. The eggs are tucked in straw to stop them from cracking, and you mutter a quiet warning to the jug, as if it might choose to slosh itself over for spite. The manor house looms at the edge of the village like a stone tooth, large, cold, and always watching. It's not a castle, not quite, but it has a gatehouse and windows with glass panes, which is extravagance enough to impress the likes of you. As you walk the muddy path there, your shoes squelch with every step. A goose hisses from behind a fence, and you hiss back. Today, you're not in the mood. The bailiff greets you at the gate, his face half-shadowed beneath a woolen hood. He checks your bundle with the care of a man inspecting treasure, though you know he's more interested in catching a missing egg than praising your careful wrapping. You curtsy slightly more out of form than feeling. Inside the manor yard, servants rush around like panicked ants. A cart has broken an axle, and 2 young boys are wrestling with it while a steward shouts instructions too fast to follow. A dog barks. A stable hand laughs. The air smells of hay, leather, and someone's poorly tended chamber pot. Ah, nobility. You're directed to the kitchen, a large, dim space with blackened beams and pots hanging like iron fruit from overhead hooks. The cook barely glances up as she takes your offerings. She inspects the eggs, weighs the cheese with practiced hands, then grunts, apparently satisfied. You'll get no thank you here, and you don't expect one. But the kitchen's warmth is welcome, and for a moment, you linger. There's a small fire in the corner, and someone has spilled a bit of cinnamon on the counter. A scent so exotic it almost makes your knees weak. You lean in without thinking, inhaling the smell deeply. You could eat it with a spoon. A scullery maid passes by, face flushed and arms full of trenchers. She nods toward the hallway. "They're in the solar again," she says quietly. "Talking about the taxes." You raise an eyebrow, curious despite yourself. Taxes mean harvest tallies, and harvest tallies mean rumors, which mean stories to whisper over the fire tonight. You edge closer to the archway, not quite eavesdropping, just loitering thoughtfully. Through the half-open door, you catch a few words: levy, shortfall, serf absconded. The steward's voice is clipped and irritable, while the lord's is slow, almost bored. They speak of land as if it were parchment, flat, foldable, and entirely theirs. You hear your village mentioned. Your brow furrows, that's always a bad sign. A woman's voice cuts through the air. The lady of the manor, you think? Her tone is sharp, imperious, not angry, but impatient. You can't make out her words, but the way she speaks makes your stomach twist. You imagine her face, smooth, powdered, untouched by cold or coal dust. When was the last time her hands bled from laundry? A small crash jolts you from your thoughts. Someone's dropped a ladle. The noise breaks the moment, and you scurry away before anyone sees you loitering. Curiosity is a dangerous indulgence. On your way out, you pass the chapel tucked behind the main house. A young priest stands at the threshold, face pale and sunken from fasting, or perhaps just too much piety. He nods solemnly as you pass. You respond with the kind of nod that means, "Yes, yes, may God save us all, but I have cheese to deliver." Back on the road, your apron now empty, you walk faster. The air feels tighter around your ribs, and the manor's shadow clings to your shoulders like a shroud. You've seen just enough to feel uneasy. not enough to understand. When you return home, the children are arguing over a stick shaped like a sword, and your husband is nowhere in sight. You set down the empty jug and lean against the doorway. Your daughter runs to you, breathless. "Did the lady wear jewels?" she asks, eyes wide. You shake your head. "She wore a face like thunder," you reply, and that seems to satisfy the child more than any crown would have. That night, over barley soup, you quietly repeat the bits you heard, the steward's complaints, the whispered worries about a missing serf. The words slip into the room like smoke, curling in the corners, warming no one. And though the fire crackles cheerfully, you can't help but feel the manner's chill linger in your bones. Section 5, The Whispering Field. By the time you reach the field, your feet are already damp again, your skirt hem soaked with dew and spattered mud. The long strips of farmland stretch like patchwork, each narrow line claimed by a different villager. Your family's plot is the third from the left, bounded by a row of sticks and a stubborn clump of thistles. It's planting season again, though no one really stopped. There's always something that needs tending: barley, beans, rye, crops that grow not with love but with desperation. You drop your basket of seed, flex your back, and take in the scene. Other women and men are already out. Bent figures in wool and leather, their shadows stretching long in the angled morning light. The land smells of damp soil and old manure, sharp and earthy. Birds dart low over the furrows, looking for worms turned up by the spades. One of the reeves walks past, tallying who showed up on time. You make a point of looking busy, though your knees already scream otherwise. You stoop to begin, press, sprinkle, cover. Again and again, the rhythm is reliable. Press, sprinkle, cover. The woman beside you, Mistress Gilda, leans over conspiratorially. "Did you hear about Oswin's youngest?" she asks in a stage whisper. "You didn't, but of course you want to." He kissed the potter's daughter, right behind the church. She slapped him with a ladle. You snort. The image is delicious. There's always gossip in the field, as reliable as frost and often just as biting. Mistress Gilda continues. "They say the lad's going to be fined. Public mischief or some such." You nod thoughtfully. Though the thought of someone kissing anyone seems about as far removed from your life as swans from soup. Still you file it away. Tonight it will become a story by the fire, woven into the evening like a loose thread on a tunic. Your youngest son toddles up, clutching a worm in his chubby fist. He beams as if he's found a treasure. You pretend it's gold, coo over it, then subtly toss it aside when he's not looking. He runs off again, chasing beetles, making war cries in a voice too high to be frightening. The field work continues. Your hands turn dark with earth, your shoulders ached into silence. But here, in the openness, there's room to think. About the stew you'll make, about the shoes that need patching, about whether that priest who's been sneezing for a week might die before Lent. The sun climbs slowly. Sweat forms under your coif and a trickle of it runs down your back. A bee lands on your arm, curious. You swat it gently, not out of anger, just negotiation. You're both too busy for a fight. Later, when the sun is nearly overhead, someone calls a break. You gather near the hedgerow with the others. The bread you brought is dry and dense, a small round wrapped in cloth. But it fills your mouth and your stomach just enough. You share it with the boy, who accepts it with hands sticky from digging. A woman from the next plot over offers you a bite of her turnip. You take it, nod your thanks and chew slowly. The flavour is bitter, but you smile anyway. You glance down the hill and see the manor house again, far away now. Distant, like a dream that slipped out of your fingers. From here, the world seems quieter. No lords, no taxes, just soil, breath, and the quiet crunch of seeds in hand. Mistress Gilda leans in again, whispering like a market peddler. Did you know they're saying the miller's wife talks to birds? Swears a crow told her the weather's turning. You don't know what to make of that. Madness, magic, or just loneliness. But you like the image. A woman on a rooftop confiding in birds, better than confiding in men most days. When the break ends, you return to the task. Press, sprinkle, cover. A strange peace settles over the field, not quiet, but full. Full of motion and murmurs and purpose. Here, your work is visible. When the grain grows tall, it will be because your hands made it so. As the afternoon drags on, the air grows heavier, and the dirt clings to your skin like a second layer of cloth. But you endure. You always do. And when you finally stand upright, brushing your palms together, you look over the rows you've planted. They're nothing special, just lines in dirt. But they mean bread. They mean life. They mean you've done something that matters, even if no one says it. Section 6, Midday Meals and Malcontents. The sun is just beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the yard, when you gather your skirts and head back toward the cottage. Your legs are heavy, coated in dust and effort, and your stomach growls like an angry dog. The morning's dry bread is a distant memory. It's time to conjure a meal from whatever the pantry hasn't forgotten. Inside, the cottage smells like people. Old wool, wet shoes, and fatigue. You open the larder. A turnip, a few onions with green sprouting tops, a stub of dried salt pork. That'll do. Barely. You toss the pork rind into a clay pot, cover it with water, and set it near the hearth to simmer. The children watch, circling like hungry cats. You give them tasks to keep their minds off their bellies, fetch the herbs, wash the bowl, chase the chickens from the doorstep. Anything to buy time. The turnip resists your knife like a stubborn old man. You press harder, hands slick with onion tears, until it finally gives way. The pieces plop into the pot with a thick splash. You drop in the herbs, a handful of whatever's still growing in the window box, mostly sorrel and wild garlic. It smells better than it tastes. As the pottage begins to bubble, you settle near the fire and pull your son onto your lap. He's filthy. So are you. There's no point pretending otherwise. Dirt is the family's most consistent guest. The door creaks open and in walks your neighbor, Isabel, cheeks red, eyes gleaming with the promise of scandal. "You'll never believe what I just saw," she says, dropping onto the bench as if summoned by drama itself. You raise an eyebrow. Go on then. Well, the bailiff's son, not the eldest, the second one, the one with the twitchy eye, was behind the churchyard with Maud, the baker's niece. They thought no one was looking. "Let me guess," you murmur, stirring the pot. "He was trying to bless her without the priest." Isabel cackles. "Aye, and she slapped him with a bit of dough, right in the face." You both laugh, sharp and sudden like breaking glass. The children look over, wide-eyed. They don't understand, but they know joy when they hear it. The pottage thickens. The aroma fills the room. Humble, savoury, slightly scorched. You ladle it out in chipped bowls, one for each hungry mouth. The youngest spills his. The middle one complains there's no meat. The eldest eats without a word, her eyes distant, already too old. You scrape the bottom of the pot for yourself. The turnip is woody, but the salt pork softened enough to fool your tongue. You chew, slowly, letting the warmth fill you, even if the flavour doesn't. Later, the village bell tolls again, not for death this time, just a meeting in the square. The reeve wants a head count for repairs to the mill wheel. You consider going, just to see who argues the loudest. But your knees vote against it. Instead, you sit on the stoop, bowl in hand, and watch life unfold. A boy chases a goose. A woman hangs wet sheets that catch the light like sails. Two old men argue about St. Cuthbert's feast day. Again. Everything repeats, and yet nothing stays the same. Isabel nudges you. You think Maud's niece will be in trouble? You shrug. Only if the lad has a jealous betrothed. She smirks. Or a generous dowry. The sun lowers, and the air begins to cool. You collect the empty bowls, stack them beside the hearth, and rinse them with the last of the clean water. There's no soap left. Just grit and your patience. You wipe your hands on your apron and lean against the doorframe, staring out at the road. The manor sits on the horizon, quiet now. The fields, too, are still. But behind every closed shutter and soot-dark chimney, life simmers. Simple, stubborn, strange, just like your pottage. Section 7, spinning for winter. The sun slips behind the trees now, and the sky turns the colour of soot and old plum jam. Evening arrives quietly, without ceremony, but with a certain chill that creeps beneath the doorframe and settles in your bones. The fire is stoked again, barely enough to cook by, but that's not tonight's priority. Tonight is for spinning. You drag the spinning stool closer to the hearth and pull the bundle of wool from the corner. It smells faintly of sheep, earth, and the faintest hint of lanolin. You like that smell. It's honest. Real. You can trace it back to its source. Your spindle is old, its wooden whirl smoothed from years of use. You loop the first strand with practiced fingers and begin to twist. Pinch, spin, draft, wind. Over and over, the rhythm soothes like a lullaby you perform with your hands. The children play in the corner, building a fort of blankets and overturned stools. You don't interrupt. Their laughter, faint as it is, softens the edges of the room. Your husband dozes near the fire, one boot half off, snoring softly. The dog lies at his feet, chasing something in its sleep with twitching paws and quiet yelps. Across the hearth, Mistress Gilda joins you with her own bundle of wool. Her spinning is faster, more erratic, her fingers worn but clever. She talks as she works, her voice low enough to pass as gossip, high enough to make sure you hear. "You ever hear about the nun who ran off with the minstrel?" she asks, eyes glinting with mischief. You smirk. That's not a real story. "Oh, but it is," she insists. "Came through last spring. Said he met her at the convent gate. She climbed over the wall with nothing but a cloak and a lute." You raise an eyebrow. "A lute? Swore she'd rather play songs in taverns than chant psalms in Latin. And she had the hips for dancing too." You both laugh and your thread snaps. Of course it does. You sigh, retwist it, and keep going. The wool isn't as fine as you'd like. The sheep this year had patchy coats and the fleeces were full of burrs. You plucked them clean as best you could, but still, every now and then your fingers catch on a stubborn bramble remnant. It's tedious work, but you think about what it will become. Mittens, maybe, or a hood for your eldest daughter, who outgrew hers 2 winters ago and hasn't stopped coughing since. The door creaks open, and the wind brings in a gust of chill air, and with it the sound of distant singing. A group of boys from the next village are walking the lane, likely full of cider and bravado, their voices off-key but spirited. One shouts a line about love and ale. Another breaks into a mock verse about a girl who refused to marry because she'd rather 10 pigs than men. You shake your head, amused. "Wise girl," you mutter. Gilda grins. "You'd marry a pig if it brought you firewood." You nudge her with your foot. "If it chopped it too, maybe." Your spindle grows heavier with the spun thread, and you wrap the finished length into a tight ball. The pile beside you grows slowly. The work is slow, but it adds up. That's the way of all things. Bread, warmth, children. Little by little, stitch by stitch, twist by twist, Gilda finishes her thread and tucks it away. "You coming to the feast next week?" she asks. They say there'll be a fiddler. You shrug. Depends on if I can finish this wool and whether my eldest doesn't start coughing again. She nods. Quiet now. The unspoken weight of worry sits between you. You both know how quickly a cold becomes something worse. How one night of fever can turn into a shallow grave by morning. Still, the spinning continues. When the thread finally slips from your fingers and the spindle comes to rest, the room is quiet. Even the children have tired, their fort collapsed into snores and tangled limbs. You sit there for a moment, the wool in your lap, the fire hissing softly. Outside, the wind picks up again. Winter's closer now. You can feel it in your knees, your throat, your breath. But you're ready, or close enough. You gather the spun thread, tuck it into the basket, and stand slowly. The day's work is done for now. You survived it, one spin at a time. Section 8, Church Bells and Chores. Just as you think the day might let you rest, the church bell tolls. One solemn note, then another. Not the funereal rhythm, thank heaven, nor the festive triple chime of a feast day. This one is slower, weightier, the call to prayer. The kind that expects your knees on cold stone and your soul bent humbly toward heaven, whether or not your soup is burning. You sigh, rising from your stool, your back reminding you with every crack and creak that you are no longer 20. You nudge your husband's boot gently with your toe. He grunts, but doesn't wake. You let him sleep. He'll claim he was resting his eyes anyway. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, grab your eldest child by the elbow. She's too tall now to be summoned by name alone, and step out into the fading light. The wind has turned sharp. It smells of smoke, wet leaves, and distant snow. Your breath fogs before you. The chapel sits near the center of the village, its tiny bell tower silhouetted against the purple sky. You walk slowly, boots thudding on the frozen path. A rooster scurries across your way, confused by the light perhaps, or just foolish. At the chapel, the priest is already there, standing near the altar like a scarecrow in robes. He mutters something about grace and humility. You bow your head, mostly out of habit. He talks about patience, about labor, about God's reward waiting after this life. You think, not for the first time, that you'd rather he send a bit of that reward during this life, maybe in the form of dry firewood or shoes that don't leak. After the prayer ends, you slip out before the priest can notice your half curtsy. You don't want a lecture about missing last week's confession, not when your sins are so small and your time so scarce. Back at the cottage, the children have discovered that a goose has broken into the kitchen. Again, it's flapping around in a panic, knocking over a bowl of soaking peas and honking like it's been personally insulted. You chase it in circles for a full 5 minutes before finally cornering it near the hearth. It hisses, you hiss back, and eventually you manage to grab it by the wings and shove it, flailing and furious, out the door. You slam it shut behind you and lean against the wood, panting. Your middle child peeks around a bench. "Can we eat it?" she whispers, hopeful. You shake your head. "It belongs to the reeve, unless you fancy a fine and a beating." She considers. "Maybe just bite it?" You laugh, a dry, wheezy sound, and wave her off. Go help your brother mop the peas. Chores are never done. Even now the floor needs sweeping, the chamber pot emptying, the lentils sorting, the cheesecloth washing. You set to it all without complaint, not because you enjoy it, but because there is no alternative. Joy is optional, work is not. At one point you hear a knock on the shutter, a gentle coded knock, 3 taps, then 2. You lift the latch and find your neighbour's daughter standing outside with a bundle of cloth. "Mam says you still have the comb," she says quickly, eyes darting around as if expecting dragons. "You forgot, of course." You dig through your basket and hand it over. She lingers. Did you hear about the field mouse they found in Father Godric's wine? You blink. Alive?
Dead, drunk, belly up. Mam says it's a sign. Of what?
She shrugs. Either God's wrath or the vintner's laziness. She's gone before you can laugh. You're not sure which was funnier, the story or the delivery. As night deepens, the chores finally quiet. You sit again by the fire, spooning a bit of leftover pottage into your bowl. The wind rattles the shutters. The dog groans in its sleep. And from somewhere out in the dark, a goose lets out one indignant honk, as if still holding a grudge. You smile into your bowl and think, today was ordinary. And that, in its own way, feels like grace. Section 9, a merchant's wife passes through. Morning returns before your dreams have time to finish. There's a hole in the thatch above your bed. Small, but wide enough to let the dawn poke through and slap you awake. You rub your eyes with the back of your hand, already dry and cracked from yesterday's spinning. Outside, someone is calling to a mule and a cart creaks down the lane. Unusual, this early. You peek through the shutter, still stiff from last night's wind. A small procession approaches, wheels clattering over the frost-hardened dirt. A merchant's wagon draped in colourful cloth and trimmed with tassels now dulled by road dust. It's not just any merchant either. You can tell by the richness of the mule's saddle, the cut of the driver's cloak, the confident way the woman riding beside him carries herself. She's not a noblewoman, no crest, no train of pages, but she's not one of you either. No mud on her hem, no soot under her nails. She sits tall, cloaked in blue that catches the morning light like river water. Her veil flutters in the breeze, and she smiles at something the merchant says. It's the kind of smile you haven't worn in years. Carefree, painted, expensive. The children gather to gawk. Your youngest points at her boots, polished to a shine, and whispers, "She looks like a story." You nod. She does. One of the nice ones where no one ends up eaten or married off. You watch as the wagon halts at the square. The merchant sets up a table, glass beads, spices, embroidered cloth, items no one in your village truly needs, but which everyone will come to see anyway, like moths to candlelight. Later that morning, curiosity defeats you. You tuck your hair back, brush dirt from your apron, and head to the square under the pretense of buying thread. Not that you'll afford much, but looking costs nothing. Not yet, anyway. The merchant greets you with a grin too practiced to be genuine. His prices are high, his compliments higher. But it's the woman, the merchant's wife, you assume, who draws your attention. She's arranging ribbons by shade, her fingers nimble, her gaze steady. Not shy, not grand, just sure of herself. You linger near the fabrics. She looks up and nods politely. "Lovely day," she says, her voice not soft, not high, confident, warm but edged with something sharper. Education, perhaps, or simply travel. You murmur a reply. Not too muddy yet. She smiles at that. You spin your own? You nod, and weave, sometimes. She gestures toward a bolt of deep green linen. That one's Flemish, too fine for most hands, but you look like you'd make something useful out of it.
It's meant kindly, but it lands oddly. You wonder if you look that obvious? Someone who always makes things useful? Not beautiful, not luxurious, just functional. You don't buy anything, you thank her and walk away.
But something about her stays with you.
Later, back at home, you sit mending your husband's only tunic. Again. The elbows split. Again, you think of her gloves, probably lined with fur. You wonder where she'll sleep tonight. An inn, maybe, with feather mattresses and wine diluted with honey instead of water. You wonder if she envies you, your hearth, your children, your rootedness.
You doubt it. Still that night, you find yourself humming a tune you didn't know you knew. It must have come from her wagon, a merchant's melody, drifting like cinnamon smoke. You wrap your shawl tighter, spoon soup into the children's mouths, and wonder where she is now. On the road again, perhaps, or sipping spiced wine by a better fire. She'll be gone by morning, most like her are. But the green linen, the smile, the music, all of it lingers, woven like thread into the fabric of your day. Section 10, the Ale Conundrum. The following morning you wake to the smell of something sour, not quite spoiled, but teetering on the edge. The jug of ale beside the hearth has turned again. You sniff it once, wrinkle your nose and sigh. Bad ale means bad luck, or worse, bad health. But there's no choice. You'll need to brew another batch, and today's as good a day as any. You gather the brewing tools from their usual place. The heavy pot, the stirring stick, the cracked strainer that always leaks from the side. Your youngest offers to help, and you nod, handing her the barley sack. It's not full, but there's enough. You measure by instinct, not numbers. Brewing ale is a task as old as the thatch above your head, and more delicate than anyone admits. Too little boiling, and it sours. Too much, and it burns. Too weak, and no one drinks it. Too strong, and the tithing man comes sniffing, asking whether you're planning to open a tavern out of your pantry. You tip the grain into the water and stir slowly, the motion steady, circular, a kind of prayer. The pot hisses, spits, and then calms into a low bubble. The scent rises, warm, earthy, almost sweet. Not quite pleasant, but full of promise. Your daughter watches the bubbles with fascination. "Is it beer yet?" she asks. "Not yet," you reply. "Still just a hopeful stew." Once the barley mash is boiled and cooled, you strain it through a cloth, careful not to spill. You whisper a small wish into the steam, just for luck. You're not superstitious, of course, but you've never not whispered it, and things haven't gone entirely wrong yet. You pour the liquid into the jugs to ferment, covering each with cloth and twine. You set them near the hearth to keep warm. Not too close, not too cold. Like swaddling a baby. You'll know in 2 days if it's turned out drinkable or deadly. While cleaning up, your neighbour drops by, again, holding her own jug, cheeks flushed, eyes suspicious. "Yours turn too?" she asks, holding out the vessel like it's cursed. You nod. "Third time this season." She leans in. "The baker's been adding dried apple peel, swears it sweetens the brew." You raise an eyebrow. "Or invites ants." She grins. "It's a gamble, like marriage." You share a laugh, low and tired, but real. She asks for a pinch of extra barley. You give it. She gives you a bit of dried mint in return. Barter is the lifeblood of the village. Not always equal, but always essential. That afternoon, the tithing man comes by, pretending to check on church alms, but sniffing around doorways with too much interest. You stand in your threshold, arms crossed, expression blank. He says nothing about brewing, just mutters about mice in the grain stores and the need for another levy soon. You nod, offer him a bit of bread, and wait until he's out of sight before you roll your eyes so hard your head nearly follows. Later, your husband tastes the old jug and grimaces. "Sour," he declares. "Still better than the miller's," you shoot back. "His tasted like sheep last time." He shrugs. "Drinks anyway." You smile. Survival has a flavour, and sometimes it's just sour enough to remind you you're still here. The children play outside, chasing each other with sticks that are swords, then brooms, then dragons. You sit by the window, watching your fresh jugs and hoping the bubbles form just right. Brewing is half patience, half chance. Like most things in your life, you do what you can, you stir, you strain, you wait. And you pray, not to saints or to heaven, but to yeast. Section 11, Moontime, Woman-time. You wake with a slow ache in your belly, deep and familiar, a tugging, twisting kind of pain that blooms and fades like breath against frost. You know this feeling. Every woman does. It's your moon time, as they call it, though there's nothing romantic about it. The moon doesn't bleed. You do. You groan quietly, roll to your side, and sit up with care. pressing your palm to your lower stomach. The children are still asleep. Your husband is already gone, off to check the traps or borrow a spade. You envy him in this moment, not because he's useful, but because he gets to be unaware of what your body does to you month after month, without fail, without mercy. You shuffle to the hearth, warm your hands, and fetch the herb pouch from the shelf, the one with the worn drawstring and faint smell of old roots. You choose yarrow, a pinch of meadowsweet, and as a final touch, 2 leaves of mint. You steep them in hot water, watching the herbs swirl like secrets at the bottom of the cup. As you sip, you remember the old story Gilda once told, about a midwife who claimed dried toad skins could ease the pain. You asked, half joking, if the toad had to be alive when harvested. She said nothing, just winked. You've never had the nerve to try. Today there will be no sympathy, no rest. The chickens still need feeding. The linens still need mending. The firewood still needs hauling. You do all these things anyway, slower than usual, teeth gritted, spine bent just slightly more than yesterday. At one point, your daughter notices the way you pause by the table, hand on your hip, eyes shut against the cramp.
Are you sick? She asks, voice thin. No, you say, just woman sick.
She tilts her head, puzzled. You sit her down, pour her a smaller cup of the same tea. It's too early to explain it all, but not too early to start whispering truths. Truths no priest bothers to mention. Sometimes, you say, your body does something hard just because it can. It doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're alive. She frowns. Like coughing? You chuckle. Sort of, but lower. Outside, the village boys are playing near the stream. You hear them laughing about something. Maybe the smell of the tanner's pit. Maybe each other's faces. A boy calls another milkmaid and gets a fist in the stomach for his trouble. You shake your head. They know nothing of blood that comes without battle. Later, when you go to the stream to rinse the cloths, the ones you wear beneath your shift, now stained deep rust, you do it privately, carefully. You tuck them behind a rock while they soak. You glance over your shoulder, though you know no one's watching. It's not shame, exactly. More a tired kind of silence. You were told not to talk about it, but you've never obeyed that rule. Back at home, Gilda stops by with a basket of peas and a tail. They say the Lord's wife doesn't bleed at all, born blessed or cursed, depending who you ask. You raise an eyebrow. Or barren, she shrugs, or lying. You both chuckle, low and conspiratorial. Then she hands you a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is a mix of dried raspberry leaf and crushed willow bark, her own remedy. Not for sharing with men, not for priests, just woman to woman. As evening falls, you sit near the fire with your knees drawn up, the warmth easing some of the pain. Your daughter brushes your hair clumsily but sweetly, asking no more questions for now. You sip the second cup of tea and feel a little less like a martyr, a little more like a survivor. You're reminded once again that pain is part of your inheritance, not to glorify, but to understand.
And in that understanding there is power.
Section 12, the widow's warning. The knock comes just after sundown, not loud, not urgent, but steady. 3 taps, then silence. You open the door to find Widow Hilda standing there, wrapped in layers of grey wool and mystery. She smells faintly of beeswax and turnips, and her cane is planted firmly in the dirt beside her. She doesn't wait for an invitation. She never does. "I brought the sewing needle you lent me," she says, holding up a cloth pouch that rattles softly. Then after a pause, "And I brought a story." You step aside. Inside, she settles near the hearth with the weight of someone who owns every chair she touches. The children eye her warily. They've heard things. That she buried 5 husbands, that she talks to crows, that she once hexed a man's bread so it never rose again. You've heard those stories too. You don't believe most of them, but you listen anyway. As you pour her a cup of watered cider, she begins, "First one," she says, "died in the fields. Heart gave out during harvest. I was 17. You nod. You've heard this one before, but it never dulls. Second, stomped by a bull. He used to beat me, not anymore. The children glance at each other. One stifles a gasp. Third, choked on a chicken bone. I warned him not to talk with his mouth full. He didn't listen. You raise an eyebrow. She winks. The fourth, well, let's say he drank himself into a stupor and never woke up. And the fifth, you ask?
Ah, she says, smiling thinly. He left.
You blink. Left? She sips her cider. Ran off with a fishwife from Dunmere. Took my good boots and 2 silver spoons. Still count him as dead. The children are now frozen, wide-eyed, bowls forgotten in their laps. Widow Hilda turns to them slowly. Do you know what all 5 taught me? They shake their heads. Don't marry for muscles. Don't marry for coin. Don't marry for love, neither. Marry for silence. A man who speaks too much is dangerous. You suppress a laugh and cough into your sleeve. She's half mad, you think, or half brilliant, or maybe both. She leans back in the chair, staring into the fire. The flickering light deepens the lines on her face, carves out shadows under her cheekbones. She doesn't look fragile. She looks forged. Your daughter, bold from youth, whispers, "Were you ever scared?" Hilda doesn't answer right away. Then she says, "Yes, all the time, but I learned something." "What?"
You can be scared and do it anyway.
The room quiets. Even the fire seems to listen. After a long silence, she stands with a groan, bones popping. "Well," she mutters, "I've warned you enough for one night." You walk her to the door, her steps slow, careful. Before she leaves, she puts her hand on your arm.
"You got the look," she says.
What look? The look of someone who hasn't broken yet, but will bend in just the right places. You don't know if it's a compliment or a threat, maybe both. After she disappears into the dark, you shut the door gently and lean against it. The fire crackles, the children whisper. The air feels heavier now, but also clearer. That night, you dream of a crow in a wedding veil cackling on a church steeple. You wake up laughing and don't tell anyone why. Section 13, Love Actually, but illicit. It begins, as these things always do, with whispers and a missing scarf. You're gathering eggs near the hedgerow when you spot Maud, the Reeves' middle daughter, creeping back from the stable, hair wild, cheeks flushed, and skirt slightly askew. She spots you, freezes, then straightens with the speed and panic of someone who's just remembered she left her virtue behind. You raise an eyebrow. She mumbles something about checking on the calf. You nod, slow and knowing. Maud's no fool, and neither are you. By the time you walk back to the cottage, the story's already grown legs. A boy swears he saw a shadow moving in the hayloft. Another girl claims to have found a button. Brass, finely made, not from any of the local lads. That narrows it down. There are only so many boys in this village who own brass buttons, and fewer who'd risk the Reeves' wrath for a roll in the straw. Gilda corners you near the well that afternoon, voice low and eyes gleaming. "She's been seen with Osric," she hisses. "You know, the one from the manor, the scribe's nephew." You whistle, impressed. "Bold girl." "Bold or doomed," Gilda replies. "The Reeve finds out there'll be blood, or bans. You know what happens to girls like Maud. If caught, there's penance in public. Maybe a fine if she's lucky. If she's not, marriage. And not the sweet, song-worthy kind, the fast kind, the kind done in haste to cover shame. You've seen that look before. The quiet desperation of a bride with no gown and a belly that swells by the season's turn. But no one tells the priest, not yet. Instead, the village watches like cats watching a sleeping bird. Every glance, every word is weighted with what's not said. That night, you sit by the hearth, darning socks with extra fury. Your daughter asks why some girls kiss boys in stables. You pause. Because sometimes, you say slowly, the stable is the only place no one's watching. She nods, satisfied. She doesn't know yet how little privacy a girl has, or how quickly innocence turns into evidence. Later, you pass Maud near the chapel. Her eyes meet yours. You don't speak. You just nod, the smallest of gestures. She nods back, grateful. Not all sins are meant for punishment. The next day, she's at the market with her mother, looking too pale, too perfect. Not a hair out of place, not a smile out of step. The silence around her is loud. And then, just like that, the whispers fade. No one mentions the scarf. The button disappears. The hayloft is cleaned. Whether it ended in heartbreak or hurried vows, you never quite learn. That's the way of it. But when you pass by the stables weeks later, you notice the straw's been rearranged. Tidier, but not untouched. And on a beam above, someone has scratched 2 small letters with the tip of a blade. Not initials, not names, just M and O side by side. You smile.
Love never asks permission, and it rarely says goodbye.
Section 14. Dark comes early. Evening settles earlier now. It slides over the rooftops like a hush, like a thick wool blanket laid gently across the village. The shadows stretch long and lean, slipping between doorways, crawling up the walls. You light a tallow candle, its flame flickering uncertainly in the draught that sneaks in through the gaps in the shutters. It smells of fat and smoke and faintly of last year's onions. You bolt the door. Once, twice. Then you check it again. Not because you fear wolves or witches, but because you know what men can do when they've had too much cider and not enough conscience. The darkness makes fools of some and monsters of others. The children settle around the hearth. One sews, the other plays with a carved pig on a string, dragging it in slow circles. Your eldest reads aloud from a book borrowed from the priest. Poorly copied, full of smudges, but the story is clear enough. A saint who tames a dragon with the power of prayer and humility. You try not to laugh. You've known plenty of dragons. Not one ever bowed to anything but fire. Your husband's late returning from the woods. He said he'd check the snares before sunset, but sunset came and went. You listen for footsteps in the lane, hoping not to hear them, fearing you won't. Outside, the wind howls low and mournful. Somewhere in the forest, an owl calls once, a long descending note. The dog at your feet stirs and lifts its head, ears twitching. You hush it with a soft word and a scratch behind the ears. Then, finally, when had a boots on the step, a soft curse, the scrape of the latch, you unbolt the door. He steps in, colder than the wind itself, a small bundle of kindling in one arm and something dangling from the other, a rabbit, limp and lifeless. Dinner for tomorrow. You don't thank him. He doesn't expect it. This is just what must be done. He sets down the wood and hangs the rabbit from a nail by the door. Blood drips once onto the floor, then stops. You cover it with a rag and move on. The candle flickers again. It's burning too fast. Cheap wax. Tomorrow you'll have to barter with Mistress Anwen for better. She has bees and she knows the worth of them. You might trade wool or secrets. The children begin to drift off. One by one, they curl on blankets or in arms, heads lolling, breath deepening. You tuck them in with rough tenderness, smoothing hair, pulling up blankets, murmuring names like prayers. Your husband snores by the fire, legs outstretched, boots still on. You nudge him until he grumbles and removes them. Then you sit.
Still.
The silence stretches, the candle shortens. Your hands are idle for the first time today. You think of Maud, of the merchant's wife, of the nun with the lute, of widow Hilda and her 5 husbands and her laugh like a riddle. You think of your daughter's question, "Are you sick?" and how you told her the truth without scaring her. You think of all the work you did today and how no one will write it down. Then you smile, because you remember you lived it. Dark comes early, yes, but you've learned to carry your own light. Section 15, the long sleep. The fire has burned low. Just a soft cradle of embers now, glowing faintly beneath a skin of ash. The cottage is quiet, not truly still, but wrapped in the layered silence of sleep. The occasional sigh, the creak of old wood, the soft flutter of someone turning over under wool. You sit at the hearth, shawl around your shoulders, hair unbraided, face lit dimly by the last stub of the tallow candle. Your hands are folded in your lap. For once, there is nothing to sew, nothing to stir, nothing to sweep. It feels unnatural, this stillness, like wearing someone else's shoes. Behind you, the children lie tangled like kittens, limbs draped over one another, cheeks rosy with warmth. The youngest clutches a rag doll, one button eye missing. Your daughter's hand still rests on her little brother's back, even in sleep, a reflex of care she doesn't yet realize she's learned. Your husband snores softly, his head tilted at an awkward angle against the hearth bench. He'll wake with a crick in his neck and grumble about it, and you'll pretend to be sympathetic while handing him a bucket to fetch water. Tonight, no wolves howl, no geese squawk, no village boys shout songs in the lane. Just the wind pressing its cold face against the shutters and the crackle of one last pop from the fire. You think of the story you told earlier, just before the little ones nodded off. St. Margaret and the dragon, of course. She always wins, always emerges from the beast's belly clean and shining, hair unmussed, virtue intact. It's not realistic, but that's not what stories are for. They're not mirrors, they're lanterns. You exhale slowly and lie down beside the children, their warmth seeping into your bones like honey into bread. You close your eyes, and the day begins to drift away piece by piece. The noise, the ache, the errands, the gossip, the soap, the spinning, the spilled peas, the broken thread, all of it unspools behind your eyelids. And what remains is the heartbeat of the hearth, the hush of your breath, the soft promise that you've done enough. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. Tomorrow will ask more of you. It always does. But tonight you sleep. The fire dies slowly. Its glow fades to memory, and the room grows soft and shadowed. You lie curled beneath wool and time, body still aching, but breath steady now, slower, deeper, wrapped in the hush of honest labor. The wind outside has lost its bite. Now, just a murmur in the chimney, a lullaby sung by night itself. You feel your limbs begin to forget their weight. Your thoughts stretch thin and long like mist across the fields. The spinning wheel sleeps, the pots rest, the door holds firm. The world, for a few short hours, asks nothing more of you. And in that stillness, your mind drifts gently through the day you survived. The weariness, the warmth, the ache, the laughter, all folded now into the quilt of memory. You see Maud's flushed face, the merchant's wife's blue cloak, the gleam in Widow Hilda's eyes. You feel the sting of ash soap, the tug of thread, the softness of your child's hand on yours. You were not noble, not famous, not carved in stained glass. You were something quieter, stronger, realer. You are the breath that keeps the fire alive, the hands that spin warmth from wool, the voice that tells the dragon story again and again, even when no one is listening. The village sleeps, the fields wait, the stars blink open above the thatch like cautious eyes, and your story, ordinary, beautiful, unfinished, floats into sleep with you.
Shh, you've done enough.
You can rest now.